They thought the empty chair was just a piece of furniture, but they were about to discover it was a test of everyone in the room. On a quiet evening inside the grand Whitmore estate, hundreds of golden lights reflected across crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. The mansion had hosted countless gatherings where the most influential people in the city came to celebrate success, wealth, and reputation. But on this night, one simple chair would reveal more about people than their expensive suits, luxury watches, or famous names ever could. At the center of the elegant dining hall sat Adrian Whitmore, a man known throughout the city as a powerful white mafia boss whose presence could change the atmosphere of any room without saying a word. At 43 years old, Adrian carried himself with calm confidence. His broad shoulders filled his tailored black suit, his dark brown hair was slicked back with natural gray strands, and his short boxed beard showed the maturity of a man who had carried responsibility for many years. His black shirt was slightly open at the collar, revealing a glimpse of his permanent black and gray tattoos across his upper chest. Every detail about him spoke of control, discipline, and authority. Around him, guests carefully watched their words and measured every movement. They admired his influence, but few truly knew the person behind the reputation. Near the entrance of the dining hall stood Elena Brooks, the Black Maid who had worked quietly at Whitmore Estate for years. She wore a simple but elegant uniform, her appearance graceful and professional. Her deep ebony brown skin reflected the warm lights of the room, and her natural makeup highlighted her refined features, from her almond-shaped dark brown eyes to her soft, balanced expression. Elena was the kind of person many people passed by without noticing. Not because she lacked value, but because they had already decided what they expected to see. As the evening continued, guests filled the long dining table. Conversations about business, influence, and social status echoed through the room. Yet one seat remained empty. It was the chair beside Adrian. Everyone noticed it, but nobody mentioned it. Some assumed it was reserved for someone important. Others simply ignored it, believing they understood who belonged near a man like Adrian Whitmore. Elena continued moving through the room with quiet professionalism, helping guests and making sure every detail was perfect. She never looked toward the empty chair. She never expected an invitation. That was the moment Adrian noticed something everyone else had missed. He noticed the way Elena treated everyone with the same kindness, whether they had power or not. He noticed how she carried herself with dignity even when others overlooked her. As the room grew louder, Adrian slowly stood from his seat. Conversations began to fade. The guests turned their attention toward him, curious about what the powerful man would do next. Then Adrian walked toward the empty chair. The entire room watched in silence as he reached for it. And in that moment, everyone realized the chair had never been waiting for someone important. It had been waiting for someone everyone else failed to see. The moment Adrian Whitmore reached for the empty chair, the entire dining hall seemed to forget how to breathe. But before anyone understood his decision, they needed to understand the person standing quietly in the background. Elena Brooks had spent years inside Whitmore Estate, yet many guests had never truly seen her. They saw the uniform. They saw the role she performed. They saw the person serving the room, but they never stopped to notice the person behind it. Every morning, long before the guests arrived, Elena walked through the halls of the estate with the same quiet dedication. She checked every detail, prepared every room, and made sure everyone felt welcomed. She never expected praise. She never looked for attention. Her kindness existed in moments most people never noticed. A warm greeting to a tired employee. A patient conversation with someone having a difficult day. A simple gesture that made another person feel valued. Elena understood something many people with influence had forgotten. A person's worth was never determined by the title written beside their name. On the night of the gathering, while wealthy guests discussed investments, success, and connections, Elena remained focused on making sure everything ran smoothly. She moved through the elegant dining room with confidence and grace, never allowing the opinions of others to define her. Yet she was not unaware of the way some people looked at her. She had seen those expressions before. The brief glances. The quiet assumptions. The invisible distance people created when they believed they were above someone else. But Elena never responded with bitterness. She carried herself with a strength that did not need to announce itself. Across the room, Adrian watched carefully. Over the years, he had seen many people change when they entered his world. Some became overly respectful because of his power. Others tried to impress him because of his reputation. But Elena was different. She treated everyone the same way, whether they were a guest wearing a designer suit or a worker carrying a tray. She never acted as though kindness was a performance. It was simply who she was. Adrian remembered countless small moments that others had ignored. The way Elena stayed late to help prepare for events. The way she showed patience when others showed impatience. The way she maintained her dignity even when people failed to offer her the same respect. That evening, the empty chair beside him became more than a seat. It became a reflection of everything Adrian had been observing for years. The guests saw a maid standing near the wall. Adrian saw a person with character. They saw a position. He saw a story. They saw someone who belonged somewhere else. He saw someone who had always belonged in the room. As Adrian stood beside the chair, Elena looked at him with quiet surprise. She did not expect recognition. She did not expect a change in how people treated her. But Adrian knew the moment had arrived. Not because Elena needed to be placed beside him, but because everyone else needed to understand why she deserved to be there. The room remained silent, and in that silence, a truth began to appear. Respect was never about giving someone something they lacked. It was about finally recognizing something they had possessed. All along. The room was still silent after Adrian Whitmore reached for the chair, but the silence was not caused by fear. It was caused by confusion. The guests had spent years learning how to read Adrian, but that night, they discovered there was still something about him they did not understand. They knew the reputation. They knew the influence. They knew the image of a man who controlled every situation around him. But they did not know the thoughts that existed behind that calm expression. Adrian had built his entire life around discipline. From the outside, everything about him appeared perfectly controlled. His tailored black suits, his quiet confidence, and his powerful presence created an image of someone who never questioned his own decisions. Yet behind the carefully maintained reputation was a man who had spent years watching people reveal their true character. Adrian had met countless individuals who changed the way they behaved depending on who was standing in front of them. They showed kindness when it benefited them. They offered respect when they wanted something in return. They treated powerful people differently because they hoped to gain something from that connection. Over time, Adrian learned that appearances could be misleading. Wealth could create admiration, but it could not create genuine character. Influence could open doors, but it could not reveal the heart of a person. That was why Elena Brooks had always stood out to him. She had never treated him differently because of his position. She never tried to impress him. She never looked at him as a man with power. She simply treated him as a person. Years earlier, Adrian had noticed small moments that most people ignored. He remembered seeing Elena help a new employee who was nervous on their first day. He remembered how she quietly fixed problems before anyone else even realized there was an issue. He remembered how she showed patience even when others showed impatience toward her. Those moments stayed with him because they were rare. In Adrian's world, many people wanted to be seen. Elena was different. She spent her time seeing others. That difference changed something inside him. For a man surrounded by people who often wanted his attention, meeting someone who offered kindness without expectation was unusual. Elena did not know she had influenced him. She never tried to teach him a lesson. She simply lived according to her own values. But sometimes the most powerful changes happen without a single speech or dramatic announcement. They happen through repeated moments that quietly reshape the way someone thinks. As Adrian stood beside the empty chair, he understood exactly why the moment mattered. He was not trying to make a statement about himself. He was not looking for approval from the guests watching him. The decision was much simpler. He was acknowledging someone who had always deserved recognition. Across the room, the guests began to see a different side of Adrian Whitmore. They expected a display of power, but they witnessed something far more unexpected. They witnessed humility from a man who had everything to lose by challenging their expectations. And in that moment, Adrian realized that true strength was not measured by how many people respected him. It was measured by how willing he was to show respect when nobody else would. The moment Adrian Whitmore pulled out the chair, the atmosphere inside the dining hall changed completely. But the silence that followed was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning of a question that everyone in the room was afraid to ask. Why would a man known for his influence and authority choose to make such a simple gesture in front of so many important guests? The answer became clearer when the people around him began revealing what they truly believed. Among those watching closely was Victor Harrington, a successful businessman who had spent years moving through the same circles as Adrian. Victor was not an openly cruel man. He was polished, educated, and respected by many. But like many others in the room, he had learned to measure people by their position instead of their character. To him, the world had always been divided into those who belonged at the table and those who served it. As Elena approached the chair, Victor looked around the room, noticing the surprised expressions on the guests' faces. The wealthy attendees whispered quietly among themselves, trying to understand Adrian's decision. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked confused. They were not used to seeing someone like Elena placed in a position of recognition. They were used to categories. They were used to invisible boundaries that everyone followed without questioning. But Adrian had just crossed one of those boundaries with a simple action. Victor eventually stepped closer, his expression controlled but uncertain. He looked at Adrian and then at Elena before asking the question that many people in the room were thinking. Why would Adrian choose this moment to change the expectations everyone had accepted for years? The room became still. Adrian did not respond immediately. He looked toward Elena, who remained calm and composed. She did not appear embarrassed or uncomfortable. She did not need anyone to speak for her because she already understood her own worth. That was exactly what made Adrian's decision meaningful. He was not rescuing someone who could not stand on her own. He was recognizing someone who had always carried herself with dignity. Adrian finally turned back toward the guests. His voice remained calm, without anger or the need to prove anything. He simply reminded them that respect should never depend on a person's occupation, clothing, or social position. The words were simple, but they carried weight because they came from someone who had spent his life surrounded by people who often valued appearances above character. Victor listened carefully. For the first time, he began to question the assumptions he had never challenged. He looked at Elena differently, not as an employee of the estate, but as a person with her own story, values, and strength. Around the room, the guests slowly understood that Adrian was not making the evening about himself. He was showing them something they had overlooked for years. The empty chair had never represented who was important enough to sit beside him. It represented who they had failed to notice. And as the room remained quiet, everyone felt the weight of a truth that had been present all along. Sometimes the greatest changes do not come from powerful speeches. Sometimes they come from one person choosing to see another person clearly when everyone else refuses to look. After the evening gathering ended, the guests slowly left Whitmore Estate, but the conversation they carried with them was very different from the one they had expected. Many arrived believing they already understood Adrian Whitmore and the world around him. They believed they knew who deserved attention, who deserved respect, and who belonged in certain spaces. But one quiet decision had challenged everything they thought they knew. Still, the most important part of that night was not what the guests saw. It was what they did not know about Elena Brooks and the years of kindness that had never received recognition. Long before she stood beside Adrian at the dining table, Elena had been someone who gave without expecting anything in return. She had worked inside Whitmore Estate for years, watching countless people enter through its doors. She saw their expensive clothing, their confident voices, and their carefully chosen words. But she also saw what happened when nobody was watching. She saw impatience. She saw people ignoring those they considered less important. And she saw how rare genuine kindness could be. Yet Elena never allowed those moments to change who she was. Every morning, she arrived with the same calm determination. She greeted the staff members by name. She offered help when someone needed it. She treated every person with the same level of respect, whether they had influence or not. For Elena, kindness was not a strategy. It was a reflection of her character. What no one in the dining hall knew was that Adrian had noticed these moments for a long time. He remembered one particular morning when he had walked through the estate and found Elena helping a new employee who was struggling to adjust. While others passed by, she stopped and offered patience. She did not care whether anyone important was watching. She simply believed people deserved understanding. That memory stayed with Adrian because it was different from the world he knew. Many people around him were careful with their actions because they wanted something from him. Elena's actions were different because she expected nothing. Her respect was not influenced by his reputation. Her kindness was not connected to his success. She treated him like a human being before she ever treated him like a powerful man. As Adrian sat in his office later that night, the image of the empty chair remained in his thoughts. He understood that the moment had not been created by a single decision. It had been built by years of small moments that revealed Elena's true nature. The chair was only the first time everyone else noticed what he had already understood. Across the city, conversations continued about what happened at Whitmore Estate. Some people questioned Adrian's choice. Others admired it. But the people who truly understood the moment recognized something deeper. Adrian had not given Elena value by inviting her to sit beside him. He had simply refused to let others ignore the value she already possessed. And for the first time, many people began to realize that dignity was not something granted by wealth or status. It was something every person carried, waiting for someone brave enough to recognize it. The days after the gathering at Whitmore Estate brought a change that many people did not expect. The empty chair had become the center of countless conversations, but Adrian Whitmore was not interested in the attention. He had never made decisions because he wanted approval from others. For years, he had lived in a world where every action was measured, every word was considered, and every choice carried meaning. Yet this time, the meaning was not found in power. It was found in understanding. Adrian returned to his usual routine, but something inside him had shifted. The office that once felt like a place of control began to feel different. The large windows, the quiet rooms, and the impressive view of the city remained the same, but Adrian saw the world around him with a different perspective. He started noticing things he had previously overlooked. He noticed the employees who arrived early every morning. He noticed the people who worked quietly without recognition. He noticed how often the smallest acts of kindness were ignored simply because they came from people without influence. Elena Brooks never asked Adrian to change. She never expected special treatment because of the moment at the dinner. In fact, she continued working with the same humility she had always shown. She greeted people warmly, completed her responsibilities carefully, and carried herself with the same quiet confidence. The difference was that Adrian now understood what others had failed to see. Elena's strength was never about receiving attention. It was about maintaining her values even when nobody was watching. One afternoon, Adrian walked through the estate and saw Elena assisting a group of new staff members. She patiently explained their responsibilities and encouraged them when they felt uncertain. There was no audience. There were no important guests nearby. There was no reason for her to perform kindness. She simply chose to offer it. Adrian stood at a distance and watched quietly. For someone who had spent years surrounded by people trying to impress him, seeing someone act with genuine care was powerful. It reminded him that influence was not only about being followed. It was also about making others feel respected. Meanwhile, some of the guests from the dinner began to reconsider their own behavior. Victor Harrington especially found himself thinking about the moment more often than he expected. He remembered the assumptions he had made and realized how easily he had judged someone without knowing her story. The lesson was uncomfortable, but it was necessary. For the first time, he understood that the mistake was never the empty chair. The mistake was believing some people did not deserve a place at the table. As weeks passed, Adrian's actions began to speak louder than his reputation. He did not make dramatic announcements or seek recognition. He simply changed the way he treated people around him. The man known for his authority began to become known for his fairness. The man respected for his power began to be respected for his character. Elena noticed the change but never claimed responsibility for it. She understood that people could only change when they were ready to see something differently. And Adrian had finally learned the lesson that had been quietly waiting for him all along. True power was not measured by how many people stood beneath someone. It was measured by how many people felt valued because of them. The change within Adrian Whitmore did not happen overnight, and that was exactly why people began to believe it was real. Anyone could make one impressive gesture in front of a room full of guests. Anyone could say the right words when everyone was watching. But Adrian's transformation was revealed in the quiet moments when there was no audience and nothing to gain. The man who once measured every decision by influence and reputation started measuring them by the effect they had on others. At Whitmore Estate, small differences became impossible to ignore. Employees who had once avoided unnecessary conversations with Adrian began to notice that he listened more carefully. He no longer walked through the halls as if the world around him existed only to support his goals. He took time to acknowledge people, to ask questions, and to understand the stories behind the faces he had previously passed without notice. Elena Brooks watched these changes from a distance. She never expected Adrian to become someone completely different. She understood that strength was not found in changing a person's identity. It was found in helping someone discover a better version of themselves. Elena remained the same person she had always been. She continued arriving early, helping others, and carrying herself with quiet confidence. Her kindness did not become greater because Adrian noticed it. It had always been there. The difference was that others had finally started seeing it too. One afternoon, Whitmore Estate hosted another gathering. The same type of guests who had once questioned Adrian's decision returned, but the atmosphere felt different. They entered the room expecting the same powerful figure they had always known. Instead, they noticed a man who seemed more present, more thoughtful, and more connected to the people around him. Victor Harrington was among them. He stood near the dining hall, looking at the familiar table where everything had changed. He remembered his own reaction that night. He remembered the assumptions he had carried without ever questioning them. For years, he believed social position determined importance. But now he understood that position only revealed where someone stood in society. It did not reveal who they truly were. During the evening, Victor approached Elena and offered a sincere apology for the way he had viewed her before. Elena accepted his words with the same grace she had always shown. She did not need him to feel ashamed. She only wanted people to understand that every person deserved basic respect. Across the room, Adrian watched the moment quietly. He realized that the greatest result of his choice was not changing one evening. It was creating a moment where others were forced to look at their own beliefs. The empty chair had become a mirror. It showed people not only who Elena was, but who they had been. As time passed, more people at Whitmore Estate began treating each other differently. The change was not dramatic. There were no grand speeches or public celebrations. There were simply more moments of patience, more moments of understanding, and more moments where people chose kindness instead of judgment. Adrian learned that leadership was not about standing above everyone else. It was about recognizing the value of those standing beside you. And Elena reminded him of something he would never forget. A person does not become worthy because someone powerful finally notices them. They were worthy from the beginning. The only thing that changed was that the world finally opened its eyes. Years after the evening that changed the way people viewed Whitmore Estate, the meaning of the empty chair continued to grow. What started as a quiet decision inside a crowded dining hall had become something far greater than anyone expected. It was no longer remembered as a surprising moment between a powerful man and a maid. It became a reminder that dignity was not created by wealth, titles, or social recognition. It was revealed through the way people chose to see one another. The chair remained in the same place inside the grand dining room, surrounded by the same marble floors, elegant decorations, and golden lights. But the feeling inside the room had completely changed. The space that once carried invisible boundaries now felt warmer, more open, and more human. Adrian Whitmore often passed by that chair and remembered the person he was before that night. He remembered a time when he believed control was the foundation of strength. He believed a person had to remain distant to maintain authority. But Elena Brooks showed him something different. She showed him that respect did not weaken power. It gave power meaning. Adrian was still the same man others recognized. He was still calm, confident, and respected. His presence still carried authority. He still wore his tailored black suits, his dark brown hair remained carefully styled with natural gray strands, and his permanent black and gray tattoos remained a symbol of his past. But people noticed something beyond his appearance now. They noticed his patience. They noticed his fairness. They noticed the way he treated people who could offer him nothing in return. Elena never changed the way she carried herself. She continued living with the same quiet strength that had always defined her. She never used Adrian's respect as a reason to place herself above others. Instead, she continued offering kindness to everyone around her. She understood that recognition was not the goal. The goal was creating a world where fewer people felt invisible. Over time, visitors who entered Whitmore Estate began hearing the story behind the chair. Some expected a tale about power. Others expected a story about influence. But those who truly understood it realized the message was much simpler. The chair represented a choice. It represented the moment someone decided that another person's humanity mattered more than tradition or expectation. Victor Harrington eventually became one of the people who shared that lesson with others. The man who once questioned Adrian's decision began encouraging those around him to look beyond appearances. He learned that admitting a mistake did not make someone weaker. It showed growth. One evening, Adrian and Elena stood together near the dining room entrance, looking at the chair that had started everything. Neither of them needed to say much. They both understood what it represented. It was not about where someone sat. It was about whether people were willing to make room for someone who had always deserved a place. The world often remembers powerful speeches and dramatic moments, but sometimes the greatest changes begin with something quiet. A simple gesture. A moment of recognition. A decision to see another person clearly. And the empty chair remained as a reminder that true respect is not given because someone asks for it. It is given because every person deserves it. Years later, the story of Whitmore Estate was no longer remembered because of wealth, influence, or the reputation of one powerful man. It was remembered because one quiet decision changed the way people looked at each other. The empty chair remained in the dining hall, standing in the same place where it had once caused confusion and surprise. But the meaning behind it had completely transformed. It was no longer a symbol of separation. It became a symbol of belonging. Adrian Whitmore continued to live with the same discipline that had always defined him. He was still known as a man of influence, a person whose presence carried authority wherever he went. His calm expression, confident posture, and powerful appearance remained unchanged. The world still saw the successful white mafia boss with the carefully styled dark brown hair touched with natural gray, the short boxed beard, the tailored black suits, and the permanent black and gray tattoos that reflected his history. But those who knew him closely saw something different. They saw the patience behind his decisions. They saw the compassion behind his actions. They saw a man who had discovered that true strength was not about creating distance between himself and others. It was about using his position to create understanding. Elena Brooks remained the same person she had always been. She never searched for attention, and she never allowed recognition to change her character. The Black Maid who had once been overlooked continued to bring kindness into every place she entered. She helped others, listened carefully, and treated every person with the same respect she had shown from the beginning. Her value had never depended on being noticed by someone powerful. It had always existed within her. The difference was that more people finally understood it. Visitors who entered Whitmore Estate often asked about the chair beside Adrian's usual place. Some heard the story and were surprised that such a small action could create such a lasting impact. Others understood immediately because they had experienced moments when they were judged before they were known. They realized the chair was never really about a seat at a table. It was about whether people were willing to make room in their minds and hearts for someone they had ignored. Victor Harrington often shared the lesson he learned from that night. He admitted that the hardest part was not recognizing Elena's worth. The hardest part was accepting that he had failed to see it before. That realization changed the way he treated people around him. He became more aware of the quiet individuals who contributed without receiving praise. He learned that respect was not something reserved for people with status. It was something every person deserved. On a peaceful evening, Adrian and Elena stood together inside the dining hall, looking at the chair that had started a journey neither of them expected. They did not need words to understand its meaning. The chair represented a choice. It represented the courage to challenge assumptions, the humility to recognize others, and the wisdom to understand that every person carries a story worth hearing. The world often remembers grand victories and dramatic moments, but the moments that truly change people are sometimes the quietest ones. A place offered. A person acknowledged. A simple act of respect that reveals a greater truth. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like.